We're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. I am Lyra Lane White, and I am your host. As part of a series of our 2020 program focus, Perspective On is committed to both inspiring and mobilizing communities of faith to take bold and just action on climate justice. We honor this pledge by creating awareness and motivating activism. In our core values, we express a grounded belief in the intersection between the sacred and the natural world and to one another. COVID-19 is only the latest environmental justice issue plaguing communities of color. And for years, these communities have been forced to contend with gentrification, toxic work conditions, polluted neighborhoods, and other things that have produced detrimental impacts to communities of color. In 1991, the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit adopted 17 principles of environmental justice. These principles serve as a defining document for the environmental justice movement. The second principle reads, environmental justice demands that public policy be based on mutual respect and justice for all people, and also be free from any form of discrimination or bias. Well, in the wake of upcoming elections, tonight's dialogue will examine some of the policies outlined by the Democratic National Convention's council. The council has a platform advisory committee on environmental and climate crisis. I've invited a few authorities who, through their work, have affirmed the first principle of the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction. I have invited these persons, and I'll let them introduce themselves. They are distinguished in their own right, and we can start. Michael, you're an old pro at this. I'll let you go ahead and start. I think you have yourself on mute. There you go.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Malcom. I am the founder and executive director of the People's Justice Council, as well as the executive director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. I'm based out of Birmingham, Alabama. Alabama Interfaith Power and Light is a statewide program for the People's Justice Council. And the People's Justice Council has several different touch points, but we work locally, we work nationally, as well as internationally.
Excellent. Let's see, Alan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello there. I am Reverend Alan Jenkins. I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister, and I'm a parish associate at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church in Decatur, Georgia. I am the founder of Earth Covenant Ministry that worked with Presbyterian churches in the greater Atlanta area on environmental justice concerns, environmental issues. These days, I am a full-time hospice chaplain, and I'm currently serving at Grady Hospital in downtown Atlanta, where we have a number of COVID patients and patients who are on hospice for respiratory distress. And we know that is a huge issue here in industrialized Atlanta. Yeah, that's me.
And last but not least, our newest member of our panel tonight, Ms. Chandra Farley. Chandra, why don't you talk about your organization, who you are, tell our viewers about the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting me to join the discussion tonight. Again, I'm Chandra Farley. I work at the Partnership for Southern Equity. Partnership for Southern Equity is a racial equity organization, and we work at the intersection of racial equity and energy and climate, which is the work I lead as Just Energy Director. We also focus on equitable development, economic inclusion, and health equity. I'm also on the board of the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, so it's good to be here with Reverend Malcom. And our work on Just Energy really focuses on democratizing access to the energy planning and decision-making process, and making sure that people who we know are most impacted by inequitable utility decisions and energy planning decisions have their space to make their voices heard, to ensure that they can demand cleaner, healthier, safer, and more equitable energy and utility programs and policies.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We're going to jump right into our discussion. Our biggest thing is to talk about the recommendations that are being made for the Democratic Party with regard to climate justice. And I just want to start out just by asking, what are your thoughts so far? Reverend Malcom, I know you work on the committee that actually drafted the recommendations. What are your thoughts? How do you feel about the recommendations so far?
Well, I will say that we went through a pretty extensive process where it was an inclusive group of people that helped to put those recommendations together. I said that to say that I believe that these recommendations were shaped in equity and founded on justice because of the voices that actually were partnered in this endeavor. I think we all centered around ensuring that we were also inclusive in this process as well. And so I think it's extremely people-centered and planet-centered. And so I think that it was a great endeavor. And these recommendations are great as well.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any thoughts on what the recommendations? If you had an opportunity to just kind of review them lightly or have some input.
Yeah, I'll say that the thing that excited me the most about it is the amount of money and the speed. We do not have any more time to wait on partisan bickering. Our communities do not have any more time to wait on the politicizing of our health and our well-being and our ability to thrive and prosper. So obviously, the first thing we have to do is to make sure that we vote. And I think that should Biden be successful in being elected in November, then we will have to do the accountability work and make sure that the plans, the implementation plans move forward as laid out and committed. And I know that there are many folks who have been diving into this work, folks like Reverend Malcom and many others. And we know that just like voting, we know that the work starts after the vote.
Absolutely. And that's been kind of a bit of a clarion call that all of us in this doing justice work have been screaming, especially in the wake of all of the protests that have been occurring based on past events. And so the vote is what's important. And it's one thing to get the right people in office. The second thing that we have to do is hold those persons that we elect accountable. And it's unfortunate, but in the Black community, in the African American community, we don't always, historically, we haven't always done that. We always, in my opinion, we always focus so much on what our problems are until we don't really activate to hold the persons that we have elected into office, hold them accountable. Alan, did you get a chance to look at the recommendations?
Yeah, I'm impressed too with the document, and it's focused on the investment and calling climate change the emergency that it is, and using the climate emergency language, and the setting of $10 to $16 billion aside necessary to address this climate emergency. And I'm impressed with the pace at which, in the target goals that they're looking at, let's say 100% clean renewable energy by 2030 in electricity generation and buildings and transportation, and 100% zero carbon in new building infrastructure by 2025. So all of those are bold. The overall target for zero emissions by 2040. 2040. I will add to what Chandra is saying, or just going to partner with that voting is essential, but Biden is not going to do it for us, and so it's going to have to involve a strong grassroots popular movement to put pressure on that administration to continue forward with these aggressive goals. Some would say that these goals are not even aggressive enough. You've heard of perhaps the group. It's an international grassroots group that affiliates and has its own chapters all over the world, and that is called Extinction Rebellion. And Extinction Rebellion started in the UK, and they actually last year shut down London. They shut down the capital, which is one of the world's economic centers, and they shut it down, demanding that Parliament call climate change the emergency that it is, to state that it is a climate emergency, and then to go ahead and put a plan into practice and in action, and radically fast. I mean, it's just in the year I started studying about climate change, all the way back and experiencing it firsthand, all the way back in 1997, and by the year 2000, I can see the writing on the wall that this is humanity is right behind the 8 ball. Here we are, 20 years later, and those projections that the climate scientists said all the way back in the year 2000 were proved incorrect. In fact, climate change and the climate crisis has accelerated faster than even the more dire predictions all the way back in the year 2000. So I'm 46 years old and experienced the beginnings of the climate crisis firsthand in Guatemala when I was living there, and it's tough to see that here we are still slogging it out with the oil companies and the fossil fuel companies. But so it is an aggressive plan, but it's got to have teeth, and it's got to have grassroots movement and power to put pressure on all of our elected officials. Each one of us must hold our own elected officials accountable across the country.
That's absolutely correct.
I will say that the people that put this together had grassroots in mind, and so this becomes a tool in the hands of grassroots communities to push for solutions that will affect their communities directly. So I won't say it's perfect. Nothing is. Of course, when it goes through the political machine, it does get washed, and there are some things that you really wish that was there that aren't necessarily there, and some things that you hope that would be strengthened that may not be, because once it gets out of our hands, again, it goes through the political wash. So we did right. I would say a little bit more aggressive than it actually presents. But I also say it's still in the shaping process and hadn't all the way come through yet. So there's still time to make recommendations and suggest changes.
Yeah. Impressive work. It's an impressive work. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I have no doubt that there's a tremendous amount of credibility and validity to the policies that are being recommended. Uh, my biggest piece in all of this is that once those policies are put into place, or once the elected official that's responsible for implementing the policies, whichever parts of the policy that person chooses to use, that we mobilize as a people, as a country, to make sure that we hold that elected official accountable. Whether it's the elected official that we choose or not, there are policies that are on the floor right now that would benefit our communities, and we have to do what we can and do our part. Do our part beyond the vote, that is. So yeah, that's what I feel very strongly about it. Anybody else have anything to say? Because I wanted to also talk about a little bit about, I know one of the priorities is an emphasis on addressing the toxic hotspots, and especially those that are in predominantly Black and Latino areas. What are your feelings about that? Because I was really thinking about, from our perspective, about focusing in on the greenhouse gases, which is a big deal. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that's an interesting conversation, particularly from a environmental reparations perspective. We know that based on some earlier reports, plenty of reporting actually, that Black people are like 70% more likely to live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And that 30 miles is key, because that is when that's sort of like the range at which the negative health impacts from the particulate matter and all of the other toxins that we know are produced when we burn fossil fuels. And we know that race is the #1 indicator of siting of toxic facilities, and which has had all kinds of generational consequences on our ability, our community's ability to build generational wealth. Our homes aren't worth as much. People move out of the area, so our schools aren't as well funded. Black children die at a rate of almost 10 times that of white children from asthma, which we know is also exacerbated by burning fossil fuels. So to make the commitment to invest the dollars to start cleaning up and repairing these communities and these sites, for me, I think that is critical, right? Let's start. I know I'm on the phone with a lot of pastors and things like that, and one of the things I remember from our Jewish brothers and sisters is tikkun olam, repair the world, and I think we have to start there.
And so, to speak of another injustice, or and even take a wider view, America, the United States, is the #2 emitter of greenhouse gases.
Yes, we are.
We're actually in competition with China.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know how China actually has to live most of the time, but they've been wearing masks because they've been joking. During the time of between the time that President Obama stopped being president and Donald Trump took over, we rose like 3.4% in our emissions, and in that we had dipped like 8% over the time that President Obama was in, and the reason being is because of the rollbacks that have taken place. And let's talk about those rollbacks for a second, because I want to make sure we frame this right. I don't know if it was Alan or somebody else that I was speaking with that actually told me how to frame it. Don't just talk about he rolled back policy. No, he rolled back protections. These are protections to protect the public because of the historical pollution and toxins that we've had to deal with. And as Chandra just pointed out, and our communities are darker skinned communities. We get it the worst. And so if you look at it, we're the number 2 emitter. And in black and brown and indigenous and poor communities are getting it the worst. Just imagine how much pollution that is that actually comes in our communities.
Yeah, according to a New York Times article, the Trump administration has officially reversed, revoked, or otherwise rolled back environmental regulations or protections, over 20 protections in the realm of air pollution and emissions, over 11 in the realm of drilling and extraction, over 12 protections in infrastructure and planning, over 11 regarding animal protection, water pollution, 4 toxic substances and safety, over 6, and there are over 32 other rollbacks in the works. And I think they just did one, just announced today or yesterday. Administration rolling back the National Environmental Policy Act, which has been in existence for 50 years in this country.
Yep, it's the bedrock of our environmental protections.
Wow.
And it's gone, and it's all so that they can hurry approval of infrastructure, infrastructure projects. And if we know anything about infrastructure projects, we know that unless you particularly name black, brown, indigenous, and poor communities, those dollars don't even go to those communities. And a matter of fact, a lot of the communities get robbed because they subsidize, and so the communities don't even get the tax dollars to reinvest in the communities. And now Chandra can talk about the inequity and the economics of this, but I will say, just to kind of set her up, when we look at Black Lives Matter, I think that we should also take a conservative look at the economical Black life as well, because I think we are really, really sorely missing the point of what racism is really about.
Yeah, the rollbacks of the National Environmental Policy Act are sort of the not that he needed another gauntlet to throw. I mean, his entire administration has been disastrous on all kinds of levels. The National Environmental Policy Act, yeah, it's been around for 40 years. And I was a part of a group of almost 40 environmental justice leaders who went to Washington in February with We Act for Environmental Justice to provide public comment. There was a rally at CEQ, and February feels like millions of years ago, at this point. But for these to move forward, and with me learning from elders in the environmental justice movement, like Peggy Shepard, like Vernice Miller Travis, and Dr. Mildred McLean, this was, I think that's a wonderful way to put it. This was protection. And one of the only ways that communities who we know are most impacted by these kinds of massive infrastructure projects, that protected the only voice that they had to have input. And so what the rule changes have done, because they refer to it as modernizing these rules, is just to fast track these projects, roll back every protection and every stopgap that communities have to stand up and make their voices heard, and shorten these comment periods, right? So these documents and things like that can be hundreds of pages long. We know the burdens on communities to be able to mobilize, not just mobilize around the issue, but to be able to digest these kinds of documents, hire lawyers. And so all of that has been stripped away. And, November cannot come soon enough. It just cannot come soon enough. And, back to Biden's plan, it is strong, and there are some mentions of that, but I think, he's got a long list of executive orders or whatever orders he has to write out to make sure that all of these things are at least reset. We just have probably 6 to 12 months of just resetting all of the damage that has been done in the last almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of damage,
if I could,
go ahead, Al.
Back on that real quick.
Yeah.
The Lord, the scriptures tell us, the psalmist tells us, the Lord leads us by still waters and green pastures, and that is a promise of the Lord, as a creation that sustains us and keeps us alive and gives us a sense of peace that passes all understanding, with the blessedness of God's creation that keeps us alive. Green pastures and still waters. He leadeth me beside green pastures and still waters. And what have we done? What have we done? And mostly folks who look like me, who have created infrastructure, economy, and in industry that has defiled, despoiled, exploited, and paved over those green pastures and those still waters that give us a sense of peace and sustenance and abundant life. And it is painful to see, and I see it every day, that I'm working in a public hospital in downtown Atlanta with underserved communities who are most exposed to these kinds of toxicities that we're talking about in the particulate matter. And of course, you mentioned greenhouse gases. That's a colorless, odorless gas. But with the greenhouse gas emissions that come from our tailpipes and from our coal-burning power plants, also come particulate matter. And so I have patients that have COPD, respiratory distress, and then you add COVID on top of that, and that is a double whammy, and it's painful to see. And I can't forget either a patient of mine, an African American man in town Atlanta, all the way back in last May. This May we were blessed with really a normal spring. But last year, spring ended early and summer came soon. And we had 90-degree weather in May here in Atlanta, which is not normal. And this man's air conditioning went out in his house. He suffered a heat stroke, and he never recovered. And so he came on hospice care with us and died. And so that is just one personal story of something that is systemic in nature.
Yeah, I was getting ready to ask if one of you could, just for my viewers who may not necessarily be as knowledgeable about the parameters of climate justice, to get a good solid definition of greenhouse gas, because I don't think a lot of my viewers may not have a understanding of it.
I was actually going to do that. I was just waiting to be prompted to do that. But greenhouse gases. So usually greenhouse gases come from several different places, but what is named as greenhouse gases, for lack of a better way of saying it, would be CO2, methane, nitrous oxides, as well as fluorinated gases. And now when you look at it, CO2 comes from the burning of fossil fuels, so your coal and your different tree burning, because all fossil fuel is petrified trees that have been sitting underground for ever and a day. So any material such as coking, such as steel, and things of that nature, all of it use fossil fuels. Oil is using fossil fuel, and that is normally, or the most common greenhouse gas. Now, methane, on the other hand, I almost giggled a little bit because of my little childish nature, but when Alan was saying tailpipe, because that's usually what comes out your tailpipe is methane. And so when you get methane, you're looking at livestock. You're looking at and so when you look at livestock, just imagine the farms that raise cattle, and they just strictly raise cattle in a concentrated place, or you look at pig farms that just strictly raise pigs. They are some of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters because of the methane. So your cows and your pigs and everything got wind coming out the tailpipe, and you having to deal with that. All right. Nitrous oxide usually comes from like your waste, your solid waste, your liquid waste or wastewater, your trash dump sites. That's where you get your nitrous oxide. And believe it or not, each time I'm talking, it's like it's going in scale. So you're going down as far as how much you see these greenhouse gases or how much they actually contribute, but you're going up as far as how long they stick around. And so the last one would be fluorinated gases. And fluorinated gases can come from several different places, but they're very small as far as the amount that actually comes out. But that's the worst gas there is. So now look at all these gases combined are forming like this insulator around the planet. And so imagine, I'll do it like my mentor, Reverend Leo Woodbury says, imagine you being in a house and you get cold. You wrap yourself in a blanket, you sit under a heater or sit under the fireplace and you're sitting there. And when you get warm again, you take that blanket off and you can cut the fire down so you can get cool. But now imagine you can't take that blanket off and you can't turn the fire off. That's what climate change does. But it doesn't just warm up the planet. Because if you think it just warms up the planet, then you miss the concept. Climate change actually changes the atmosphere. So it's not just it's not just warmer weather, it's also colder weather. It's also more rain, also more tornadoes, also more hurricanes, bigger and deadlier. So if you look at it, we've had 100-year flood just about every year for the past, what is it, y'all? I believe it's like 3 years. And you look at the hurricanes, we're not saying category 1 and 2 or whatever, the smaller hurricanes. We're starting to see either big or deadly. You're not seeing small ones. Right. And the same with tornadoes, and they're happening more frequent now.
Yeah. To say nothing of sea level rise, which is not going to be a linear. It's not going to go smooth like this. No, the sea level rise is going to go like that. And so Atlanta, I think Atlanta is going to be as it was for evacuees of Hurricane Katrina. Atlanta is going to be one of these spots where people are going to move to. Along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, all these people, and they're not going to move just kind of one by one by one. No, they're going to come in waves.
Yeah.
Well, when you look globally, you already have bodies of land that now no longer exist on top of land, and you can't inhabit anymore. People have literally had to leave their land that their generations were born in because they're underwater now.
Right.
Yeah.
But Louisiana's losing like a football field a day or something crazy like that. You know.
Marsh.
And Miami's just praying.
Yeah.
Because all they need is one good one.
Yeah, and New York is actually this was last year, and maybe the figure has changed now, but they were setting aside $10 billion to start building walls to try to keep the sea out. Already $10 billion.
Yeah. Miami's spent over $1 billion, I think, at this point, literally trying to And even Georgia, Tybee Island, you know, about raising their bridge, you know, I mean, during the last hurricane, the influx of people from Florida into Atlanta. I mean, these things are happening. And, you know, I was on a different conversation earlier, but we talk about how, particularly when we're talking about engaging communities who are not just engaging communities who are first and most impacted, right? But putting them in front of the line to talk about how they are impacted and what they have lifted up as the solutions, you know, that they need. So when we talk about that, you know, people want to go back and forth about climate change and like start talking about it, but it is not something that is going to happen. It is something that is happening that we are dealing with every day. You know, we are this summer, there's been tons of, you know, we're in a heat wave right now. This summer is either going to be the hottest summer ever recorded, or it's going to be in the top 10. It has a 50% chance of being in the top 10 hottest summers ever. And I think sometimes because of the rate at which these things happen, or because at the rate we experience them, it's like, oh man, you know, now we can't tell the seasons from another. And it's kind of like we laugh about these things and we're making these adjustments because community, this is what we do, right? We adapt and we move on, but we have to start sounding the alarm that this is not right. This is not natural. This should not be happening. And we demand the resources, financial, mental, healing, otherwise, to protect ourselves and make sure that they don't continue to happen.
Unfortunately, we've politicized it.
Yeah.
Just totally. As we've done COVID, we've politicized it. And therefore, we've because of our politicizing it, we've denigrated it. Yeah. And so we don't look at it with the with the seriousness that it needs. We ought to be moving with a sense of urgency. But yet we're still pontificating if it's actually a real thing or not.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And I was even thinking about if we even give some more. I mean, there's not enough consideration given to the impacts of the pandemic. But I was talking a little bit earlier before we went live about just a few segments ago. We talked about what the predictions were in terms of the impact of the pandemic on, you know, that will come just from the environment. So as governors reopen the states and people go back to work and people start going out to, you know, trying to resume what they had before, they're driving their cars and they're putting things into the environment. And so now what you have is an environmental impact that is where people thought because of the warm temperatures would somehow minimize the impact of the virus. Now we're seeing, because of things that are going into the air as a result of the methane, ethane, the particulate matter 2.5, now we're seeing an increase, a second wave that is. And most of it is because people have gotten back to work. They've gotten back out. They're starting to go back out for entertainment. And so now we're seeing just the age group has changed, mind you, but it's still, you know, it's still impacting those persons in some pretty dramatic ways, just coming from the environment. So the time is now for us to be a little bit more deliberate and a little bit more specific about, you know, the things that we need to place priority on. Our climate is one of them. And there's racial injustice. We're talking about the racial injustice in our communities, because where we have those big power plants, those refinery plants, all of those things tend to be in areas where there's low income, the property values are low. There are no resources. And so those areas tend to be populated by persons of color. And so we see that there is a trend, there's a correlation. We found that there's studies to show that there is indeed a correlation between where these things are placed, the real estate, and where big factories are placed, and the persons that inhabit those areas, and they tend to be persons of color. So we're still talking about a form of racism that's very prevalent today.
Yeah. And I'm seeing it every day at Grady Hospital. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's a little bit quieter around the hospital because the visitation limits for family members and friends are extremely limited, and so they're not allowed to come and visit. They're not allowed to come to visit their loved ones who are being transferred over to hospice and who are dying. It is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. I had a patient whose family members hadn't seen him since February, and they were only allowed to come visit him while they were removing him from life support.
Wow.
So now everybody is wearing the face shields and the protective gear, and I had a COVID patient yesterday that I prayed for, and I mean, it just hurt. I'm embarrassed to say it. They recommended that I not go in the room to pray for him. And so I prayed for him outside the room.
Wow.
No.
And see, what I just saw on my Twitter feed was that, our governor and our mayor are in kind of a war of words over, can we wear a mask? Can we mandate a mask? No, they can't. It's not enforceable. And so now our governor is actually suing the city of Atlanta because the city of Atlanta is saying you must wear a mask. So now there's a lawsuit going on, and it's just amazing to me. Dr. Robert Bullard was once said that the people most responsible for climate change historically, globally, as well as domestically, are not the same people who are feeling the pain first, worst, or the longest. And it's just amazing that how that we see this racial injustice on different levels now. I mean, we see it more. I mean, we see it on the local level. We see the fight going on by a person who's in leadership, a person in color. Then we see on the state level, we're seeing it with our own eyes, where there's a person of a different color. In a war of words, and then we see another level of injustice that's going on the federal level. And so with that, I kind of wanted us to kind of hit on our other question about 79% of Americans say that the priority for the country's energy supply should be developing alternative sources of energy, such as wind and solar. I just want to get some insight from you guys to describe how policy decisions from the federal level, because we're seeing it now. We can talk about this pandemic. But how do decisions from the federal level, how do they affect state and local, or do they? And what are some ideas? We talk about some ideas of how the church can respond to this.
Dr. White, I told you that I needed to leave early, so let me go ahead and confuse the room, and then I'm gonna leave out so y'all can put the
Thank you very little.
Now, let me start off by saying panning out a little bit, and let's talk about the need for us to control our own energy sources and why that's important.
Talk about it.
Both to eliminate the pollution crisis or the toxic genocide that we felt generationally, but also to empower us economically. Right now, in particular in the South, we suffer from the worst energy burdens of anybody for the most part in the United States of America. And if you look at the South demographically, that's where most of your Black folk are. again, we're saying Black Lives Matter, but I don't know if economically we've considered Black lives. In Alabama, we don't even have say-so when it comes down to energy rates, energy decisions, because our Public Service Commission, one, is not transparent whatsoever. Secondly, they make decisions not based on the public's interest, but on profit. And so we are left. And again, if there's $10 to every $1,000 when it comes down to savings in white communities versus Black communities, on average, who's really getting hurt the worst when it comes down to energy rates and decision making? And it's usually communities of color or those essential workers that we call essential, but we don't want to pay them like they're essential. But nevertheless,
Amen.
let me digress. So it's our communities that suffer the most, as Dr. Bullard has said, that contribute the least. Not only do we suffer from high energy rates, but many of our homes, because of environmental racism, have been polluted and our lands have not been tended to. And so a lot of our homes aren't retrofitted for energy efficiency. And so we lose a whole lot of money during the summertime because we got to turn the AC up 100 million watts just to stay cool. Or in the wintertime, we lose it all through heat. And these are things that have historically impacted us. That unless we have control over these things, and unless we can change policy toward these things, will continue to hinder us, and not only hinder us in our health, but hinder us in our economics as well.
Because you're absolutely correct. That's a great insight. That's some great insight. And also, I can see also just kind of thinking about some of the issues that you spoke about, how the domino effect has trickled down from the federal level down to the local level, because many of the opportunities, many of the programs that could support the things that you're talking about, they are provided on the federal level, but for various political reasons, may not trickle down, may not have an impact on the state level. And it's all party driven. It tends to be very party driven. And one of the things that that I have a vision for is that both parties could share. It doesn't mean that we have to have the exact vision, doesn't mean that we have to have the exact set of values, but we do need to have some things in common that we think are for the greater good. And one of those things is to eliminate this brand of environmental racism that we've been observing for years in this country.
So going back to it, when you look at alternative energy sources, and if we had the ability to have our choice of our own alternative energy sources, it would look in the South in particular like solar. And our homes would have solar, which would then lower our bills for many of us, but some of us actually don't use enough power. And so we would contribute to the grid, and you could get paid from that. But because of policy and because of regulation, they hinder that. So like in Alabama and other states as well, they have a solar tax, and really it's just a bully tax. And they call it, they say it's for capacity storage or whatever, just in case people have to tie back into the grid. But when you look at it on the bill, it really kind of hurts you on your bill to the point that it's not even worth putting solar on your home. And so now they have you pigeonholed to being monopolized by them.
Well, one of the challenges that I have for a lot of my friends whom I feel have who are financially endowed is to go back to a concept that was introduced to us by Reverend Daley, who was on some of our previous segments, to challenge people to that they can actually change their environment by doing some things just in their neighborhood. There's a section in Atlanta where it's just about, I would say 90% people of color, but they all are upper middle class households. And if just that one section of Atlanta would agree to come together and say, we're going to put solar panels on our houses, and just in that one section, then they can change the environment in just their part of town, just their neighborhood. And so on a local level, yes, you're absolutely correct, Reverend Malcom. Those things are happening on a local level, but there are some things that we can do individually to challenge those things as well.
I apologize. I forgot to answer the other part of your question. What can we do as communities of faith?
Right, please do. Yeah, please.
Become activists. Throw solar panels on your church and make them change the law so you can benefit from it.
That's right.
You got enough people in your congregation that will cause your legislation to sweat beads.
Yep.
Will cause them to sweat beads if you just stand in front of them. And the problem is we don't know. Well, I can't even say we don't know. I don't know if it's a refusal or what it is that we won't put our energy into those places. Again, look at it. If your church had solar and you were actually getting a check instead of having to pay a bill to the bill company, what does that look like? What does it look like for you to be able to have extra money so you can do extra ministry?
That's right. And not only that, Reverend, but there are some communities of color that were in just about every state I've been to, where there may be several churches within a 1 to 2 to 3 block radius of each other. So if they all had solar panels on their churches, just imagine the impact that they would have on the community. If the people did it.
Better yet, what if they advocated for a solar farm for that community? What if they all came together to advocate for a solar farm and a solar co-op so that they could all be able to take part in that economic freedom?
Amen. Amen. Our church actually just signed on to the Climate Tax and Dividend Act, which has been a bipartisan effort going on in DC for a while now, so in this is an act that would tax carbon emissions. So from the point of extraction or when those carbon molecules are transported, let's say from Saudi Arabia to the United States in the form of oil in an oil tanker. So to the point of entry or the point of extraction, these fossil fuels, whether it be methane, whether it be coal, whether it be oil, would be taxed. And then that tax would increase every year and make it more and more difficult for those fossil fuel companies to do business. Now, of course, they would shoulder that cost back onto the public. At the gas pump or at the meter. However, this Tax and Dividend Act would take that tax. It would be revenue neutral. And so it wouldn't stay with the government, that money, that tax money. It would actually be parceled back out to taxpayers across the country. And so, so it's called the Tax and Dividend Act. So our church signed on to support that legislation, and churches and communities of faith all across the country have been signing on to that through the advocacy of what's the name of the organization, the CCL?
Citizens Climate Lobby.
Oh, thank you. The Citizens Climate Lobby.
Awesome. Well, folks, we've had a great dialogue tonight. And my prayer is that people will benefit from the information that we have provided here, and especially those persons who are church leaders, church members, persons, followers of Christ, people of faith. There's a way for you to activate, even in just your local community, to make a change in the environment. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and close. And we think it's only fitting that we close out in prayer. Reverend Jenkins, is there a prayer on your heart?
Yeah. Funny you ask. Thank you so much for that invitation. And so I do have a prayer that I would love to share with us all. So if we could pray.
Yes.
Oh Lord, Creator, we come to you in prayer. Oh God of justice, love, and peace, we come to you with an attitude of gratitude, awed in humility for the beauty you surround us with, evidence of your resurrection all around us here on these summer days. Like a yellow daisy bursting forth through a crack in the sidewalk, we see your good news that cannot be kept down. Trampled upon, cut over, paved over, polluted by fossil fuel addictions and plastic bottles, humans act like a bull in a china shop and spread like a virus. And yet still, oh Lord, your glorious, life-giving, spirit-filled, awe-inspiring greenness leaps forth from every bud of every tree to fill our lungs with inspiration and love and sustenance. And so we thank you, dear Lord, that you haven't just called us to be stewards of this green and blue planet, but rather you called us to be in relation with all of your living creation. Just as you made the covenant with Noah and every living thing that came out of the ark. And in Christ Jesus, you deepened that covenant. For you, O God, loved the whole world. You created the whole created order. That you gave your only Son, who taught us to pray, thy beloved community come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where the dividing walls between Black, Latino, white, Asian, and indigenous are broken down. Just as the dividing walls between our feet and your blessed soil are vanquished. So continually open us to the depths to which you call us, O Lord, where our true identity as sons and daughters of God is not as citizens of the so-called United States of America, but rather as siblings with all creation, citizens of the earth, members of the earth community. Like Jesus' mother Mary says, may the powerful be pulled down from their mighty thrones. And as Jesus says, the meek shall inherit the earth. For the beauty of the earth, O Lord, for the beauty of the skies, from the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our joyful hymn of grateful praise. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for listening. A special thanks to Kisa Public Radio. And as we leave you, please remember those famous words by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that whatever affects one affects us all indirectly. Good night, everyone.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.